Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States, and in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from the Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Happy Tuesday to you and happy Tuesday to all for those who celebrate. If there is anything to celebrate, I think there's just a lot of things to talk about, which is why I'm excited. So again, happy Tuesday to you all. We talked a lot about the 53-man roster reset yesterday. Now we're shifting into the here and now, which is where Joe Burrow's contract extensions, the talk of that it stands right now, along with other factors that come into play, like Higgins and Logan Wilson and their extensions and other things mixed in between. We're going to talk about that. We're going to have a special guest midway through the podcast. So I won't tell you who that is just yet, but make sure you follow along because he's a great guest that you want to listen to for sure. Welcome into another edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick here with you. And before we get into all the talks about Joey B, we were talking to all of our subtexters earlier, literally as we were walking out of the press room, the conference room in Paycor Stadium. We were texting our subscribers all the updates they needed before I even went to Twitter, before we even wrote anything, pen to paper for our website. We were texting our subscribers directly through our Cincinnati Football Insider subtext service. Guys, I mean, like I just mentioned, I was texting people. I know you guys were as well. I mean, what are people missing out on by not being a part of Cincinnati Football Insider?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you join, you're talking about a time of the year when news is going to come. We obviously talked to Joe Burrow today. You're going to get the latest updates on Joe Burrow's contract extension. You're going to get the latest updates on just kind of things we hear in the locker room, things we talk about in the locker room, kind of all of our analysis of what happens in the locker room and what happens out during OTAs, during voluntary workouts, during all that stuff. You can basically, like I said before, you can jump the line on Twitter. You don't have to worry about kind of scrolling through whatever kind of disasters going on that day. You can always read what you want to about the Bengals and cut straight through it to hear it directly from us. So it's, I think you could kind of make this case, but it's never really a bad time to sign up.
Yep, that's right. And again, you can sign up right now. It takes less than 5 minutes. You just go to cleveland.com/Bengals. It's $4.99 a month, but you get a 2-week free trial. So if you don't like me, if you don't like Andrew, you don't like Mike, you're not hurting our feelings. Just text stop anytime, and that's that. But I think you're going to like us a lot. I mean, you're listening to us on the podcast, so I'd imagine you'd like us even more. So again, go to cleveland.com/Bengals. So before I even get into the details of Joe Burrow kind of talking about his contract extension, I have to ask you guys the most pressing thing I've really been thinking about even before we talked to Burrow. Do you think Headband Joe is a fitting nickname for him? Because to be honest, I think he rocks the headband. Like, I know that's gone viral on Instagram, Twitter, social media. I know he's got all these, pictures where he's rocking the ice, rocking the jewelry. I think he looks better with the headband. Like, you guys think he's rocking the headband? I think he's Headband Joe.
I think, what did he say? It was he just wanted to grow out the hair,
He does,
which is
yeah.
why he needed it. Yeah, it just, Joe. I mean, I think whatever Joe Burrow wears is a great lesson in that it doesn't really matter what the look is. If the person wearing it is cool or unique in some way, people are going to lose their minds over it. So I'm sure if Joe Burrow had my outfit on today, everybody'd be like, wow, West Virginia Black Bears minor league baseball hats are in. Everybody loves that. And I mean, if I wore a headband, I'd look ridiculous. So,
One thing he told me, like just in private, I mean, it's not a secret, but he said that he likes to choose comfort over style. So, he'll rock the designer brands on game days, but like you see him in the locker room wearing Canes, chicken fingers, hoodies, and like SpongeBob sweatshirts, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I like that. I actually think that that's the new style, man, is just simple and casual and comfortable. He says it's all about comfort over style, and I could not agree with him more. Now, jumping into the real serious business. So Burrow talked for the first time basically since they lost to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, and he was asked about his contract negotiation status, which we've been speculating on this podcast. Well, now we don't have to speculate as much because, really kind of the way he put it is he knows what he wants in his contract. He's involved in the negotiations. How involved, we don't know, but he did say he's involved to a degree. Now, we don't know what he wants. Only he knows, and his agent knows, and the team knows what he wants. But I guess when you kind of read between the lines, like when he says he's involved, like, and again, this is maybe where we go back to the speculating part. Like, do you think he talks about sort of just what he looks for as far as like a floor? Like, maybe he's like, oh, Lamar got this, Jalen got this, I want this. Or is it more so, okay, I want to keep the band all together? Because he did also mention that part of the focal point is keeping T. Higgins in mind because he's eligible for an extension. Jamar Chase due next year. I don't think he mentioned Logan Wilson, but obviously that's another guy that's due for an extension. Like, how do you maybe, like, if you're in that room, how do you kind of guess that, like, he's putting himself in there when it comes to negotiating?
Well, I said this on our subtext today. God, I'm good. That's the second promo I've done for that in 7.5 minutes. I think, I said this today. Like, look, I've made this point multiple times over the last couple of weeks, couple of months. I don't think that there's a dollar figure unless it's ridiculous. I'm saying I don't think there's a realistic dollar figure that you can say Joe Burrow is going to leave on the table so that they can sign T. Higgins. Like, if they're going to sign T. Higgins, it's not going to be because Joe Burrow took less money. Because, again, I think we're all in agreement that Jamar Chase is going to make about $30 million. I think we're all in agreement that T. Higgins is going to make over $20 million. And if Joe Burrow makes like 55 or 60, do the math in your head. That's it's over $100 million for three players. So I don't think it's necessarily, oh, well, Joe Burrow is going to leave so much money on the table that they're going to have the money for. I don't think it's that. I think kind of what you can deduce from that is this. The structure of the contracts is going to make it easier to get T. Higgins. I mean, if you look at the contract basically of Jalen Hurts, of Lamar Jackson, the first couple of years of those deals, like you look at the salary cap figures and you kind of go, whoa, like that's lower than I thought it would be. And considering the contracts that they signed, the math doesn't really make sense. So I just think that, look, I've said this before. I think that Joe Burrow can say, I want any amount of money, and the Bengals can't really tell him no. Like, if Joe Burrow said, I want $70 million a year, $65 million a year, the Bengals can't really tell him no. What are they? It's Joe Burrow. You can't tell that guy no. But what I think you can do is say, if Joe Burrow takes 58, of course he left money on the table because he didn't get every penny that he could have gotten. So, just to kind of finish this rant, I just think that it's not so much money leaving on the table, it's the structure of everything. And I think that is, I think that's kind of the way I read into that.
I disagree about him being worth $70 million. I mean, that's kind of crazy. At that point, you just franchise tag him for 2 years and then worry about it down the line. And then, you've got a problem in 3 years instead of now. And so, but if he's talking about insane money, I just don't think they'd be on the same page. And it doesn't seem like that's the case since both sides have, seemingly said things are moving along at what pace we don't know. Will he take less? I think he could take a little bit less in certain, ways, like you said, structure, but also just, I don't know, like overall dollars, like if he has to take a little bit less, I don't think that's a big issue for him. Jamar Chase kind of hits it as much. And, if they're all talking, if they all take a little bit less to stay together, I think that's kind of what I took it to mean. It's not going to be a huge amount of money, but, I think you mentioned those contracts being backloaded, and like, I don't see the Bengals typically don't really do that. They don't want to give themselves a problem down the road. So I'd have a hard time seeing them so lopsided where they do have a year where his cap hits 80 million. And then you have the other two on top of it. So I'd be surprised if they went that route. I think when we talk about what he wants, I think he probably has a dollar figure in mind. He probably has how much is guaranteed in his mind, and some of the other stuff, he's probably bringing to the table. So I think he's quarterbacks typically are sort of control freaks, and that they want to have their know he's that kind of guy that wants to know everything and have his hands in everything. So I would think that when he says he's involved, he means it, and that he's dictating some of the terms and some of the things that the Bengals are offering.
So Andrew makes a good point about, he's not really leaving money on the table. It's more so about there's a structure that he's willing to work with that allows for Jamar and T to get theirs. Like, since you mentioned Jalen Hurts, without getting too specific, like, you kind of look at the rundown of his deal, which runs through 2028. So the common theme that kind of applies to this conversation is the cap hit isn't really that significant in the first 3 years. Like, next year, it's really $6 million, which I think is because it's still a continuation of his rookie deal. But then 13 million, 21 million, it really only starts to get pretty big those last 2 years where you're looking at $45 to $54 million a year in a cap hit. Now, it's going to be a big dead cap for him because he's getting his signing bonus. But again, dead cap doesn't really matter because you're not cutting Jalen Hurts. That's irrelevant. But besides the bonuses that he's going to be getting, which he got from signing, initially where they give him all that money, the cap hit's not that bad. So if you can kind of structure it like that, where you have that cap space, you have that breathing room, it's very possible. So I see where Andrew's kind of coming from there. But what I was gonna say though is, do you sort of agree with that approach? Because I know we talked about this a lot. Like, I know Andrew was saying, don't worry about what T gets, don't worry about Jamar gets. Like, that's a problem for Duke Tobin. Worry about yourself. Like, do you still kind of agree with that approach? Or he's like, oh, I'm keeping T in mind, I'm keeping Jamar in mind. Like, do you think that makes the most sense in this situation if you're trying to win a Super Bowl, not just down the road, but farther down the road?
Well, yeah, I've always said.
Go ahead, Mike.
I've always said that you have to try to keep those two in mind if you want. That's the core of this team. So I mean, it would make sense that he would. He goes back with Jamar Chase. So I would have been surprised if he sort of ignored it, especially with the way each of these guys preaches, camaraderie and that they're on the same page. I would have, I would have found it surprising if he then, private said like, all I want to worry about is my contract. I think that this group wants to stay together, and the only path to getting that done is if they kind of coordinate a little bit, at least, how their contracts are structured and what they make to sort of allow this team to operate financially. Otherwise, I just don't think it. I think T would be the odd man out, to be honest. And so, it sounds like that they don't want that to happen. They don't want to push him out. So then, there is coordination.
What were you going to say, Andrew?
No, I mean, to go back to what you said, yeah, I mean, I still kind of think that, I mean, obviously, Joe said that today. I mean, personally, I think it's just an easy layup PR win to say, of course you want everybody to get paid. Like, I mean, you go around the league and you say, oh, everybody would say the same thing in that situation, I think. I just don't think that, again, I look at that situation with, Joe wanting to have Jamar and T, like, of course, I mean, think about how many quarterbacks in the last handful of years have kind of openly talked about their franchise in negative ways because they didn't think that they did enough. And, it's crazy to think, but like Joe Burrow is going to be nearing that like Aaron Rodgers territory where, he's going to have more and more control over offense and things like that. And Aaron Rodgers, I mean, to be fair, he never really did get anybody besides Devontae Adams. And, there was talk about Lamar not getting the receiving help that he needed. And I just think that, when you look at all of that, you obviously need great players, but, there's a way to do this and kind of worry about yourself first and foremost, because, everybody cares about money, right? I understand that, these guys are making tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, but, everybody cares about money. Everybody wants to kind of get theirs. And I just think that when you do that, I don't think that Joe Burrow has to take, $8 or $9 million less and keep T Higgins together. I still think that there's kind of a way that if you want to do this, you can kind of structure the contract in a way that makes it more financially viable.
Yeah, I go back to what I said weeks ago, though, that I think that's a sort of a silly way to look at it, since he's never going to leave money on the table, since he's a marketable athlete who can then just go to whoever, insert brand here, and make it up in like a snap of the fingers. So he chooses to sort of limit his businesses and stuff, but like, I mean, there's no scenario where he has to leave if he wants an extra $20 million tomorrow, he can go out and find it. So like, if he cared about money in the way you're saying, I think he would make himself more available to do those things, but he chooses not to. So that says to me that there is some limit to his sort of financial ambitions, because somebody that would want to make every last penny would do the Peyton Manning, where it's like literally every company you can think of, I'll advertise for. And so he doesn't. And so I just think it's like, if he loses $10 million, I mean, it's not, A, he's never going to know. B, he could make it up in a multitude of ways. And C, I think he'd be happier with with having those other guys as opposed to the $10 million, which he won't even notice in 5 years, because his net worth will be insane. So
I think, yeah, I see what you're saying. I think overall, if you really wanted to boil it down, and this is obviously oversimplifying kind of his strategy, I think he's being smart with it, because he looks at it as like, on the one hand, yeah, like he knows what he wants. He's confident in what he wants, and he's, working with his agent on that, and he's really putting his best foot effort towards that. But at the same time, like, he made a good, humble point. Like, you need good receivers around you. Like, obviously, Joe Burrow's the face of this franchise, and it's not like he can't win without other guys. But, I mean, having T. Higgins and Jamar Chase is a big difference between having them and, some insert average receiver. Like, it's just not the same. He knows that. It's a big reason, if not one of the biggest reasons, why they have made it as far as they have, other than, him being as good as he is and all the other factors that you could look at on the other side of the ball. So it's a matter of like, yeah, you want to really think about what's best for T, what's best for Jamar, and maybe even Logan Wilson. And I don't know how much farther than that he's thinking. We're not in his head, but it's a very balanced approach of, I know what I want, but I know what my teammates want, and I know I need my teammates. So we'll see how that pans out. We'll see if he even gets paid first, because who knows, maybe T gets paid first, and then, they get the deal done for Joe right when training camp starts. I mean, this is obviously a guess. It could go the other way around, or maybe, you just deal with Joe now and you deal with T next year. Who knows? Or maybe you franchise tag him, which, again, he has the same agent as Jesse Bates, so that'd be an interesting play out for another day. But stay with us. We have a special guest that I'm really excited to have on this podcast. I spoke with him recently in the last couple of days, and that is Bengals long snapper Cal Adomitis, who was gracious and generous enough to give me some of his time to speak with me, talk about what it's like being a long snapper in the offseason, playing in Cincinnati, going into his first full season after being thrown in last year. Stick around for that conversation when we return right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast.
So you open Google Chrome on your phone, you're hunting for a super rare first edition vinyl of a band you're obsessed with, when you're supposed to be working. But this site you tapped on seems pretty shady. And Daryl from IT just jumped up from his desk. Oh no, he's coming your way. It's a good thing built-in malware protection keeps you safe and sound. Not from Daryl, though. Sorry. There's no place like Chrome. Download Google Chrome on your phone.
All right, thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. I'm joined by Bengals long snapper Cal Adomitis, as he is back in the building for voluntary off-season workouts. Cal, how you doing? Look like you packed on some size this off-season.
Yeah, doing well. Good to be back in Cincy and feeling good being back around the team, enjoying getting in the weight room. So, so far so good.
What is the typical off-season routine for Cal Adomitis? What's kind of a day in the life for you in this time of the year?
Yeah, so, in all honesty, it's still pretty relaxed in a lot of ways. We have our workouts in the morning and then, trying to find some time to get a little field work in with Drew and Evan, obviously maintaining the boundaries of certain, CBA rules we have to, follow, but getting our work in. And then, in the afternoons and evenings, still just enjoying relaxing, having free time and, trying to just still enjoy the off-season life because, I know by the time July comes around, it's going to be, pedal to the metal.
How do you enjoy the offseason, especially because obviously it's your first offseason? How have you been enjoying yourself so far?
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, my strategy at this point in time has been kind of less is more. Obviously getting everything I need with lifts and runs to stay in shape and stay ready and keep improving, myself athletically. But other than that, I find myself bored at times, but I'm like, that's okay this time of the year. I'm trying to also stay in touch with guys that I know who have, been in the league and guys who've been mentors to me, and they kind of all said the same things. Make sure you give yourself time and space to really not have too many to-dos day to day. So,
I guess obviously you're a Pittsburgh guy. How do you split your time between Cincinnati and Pittsburgh in the off season?
Yeah, so immediately following the season, I was spending most of my time in Pittsburgh, just living with my parents and lifting down at University of Pittsburgh's facilities. I'm still pretty close with a lot of the coaches and even players down there, and but obviously once voluntary workouts started back, I was excited to get back to Cincy, and so now I'm here for our 9 or 10 week off-season program, finishing with OTAs, and then I'll spend another couple weeks back in Pittsburgh, and then I'll be back up here for good for camp.
You mentioned that you stay in touch with a lot of guys from Pitt who are in the league. I guess who are some of the guys that you're close to, Pitt-wise, that you've talked to across the NFL so far?
Yeah, well, obviously, not to there's no sharing of precious information, but Kenny's a guy who I've played a lot of ball with at Pitt, and he was back at Pitt training as well, and it's been fun because I think both of us have put on some significant size since this past season, which is it's fun to. It keeps us competitive too, when we're both in that Pitt weight room working out and, just talking our smack to each other. And so he's a guy that, we've been in communication. And Lucas Kroll, another guy from my class who is with the Saints currently and plays tight end for them. He's been back around at Pitt as well, training through the offseason. And those are probably the two main guys. But, as well, just being at Pitt, trying to pass my knowledge down to, some of the guys who are coming out this year as well for their rookie season.
Forgive me if this may be asking too much, but without revealing conversations, obviously, have you spoken with DeMar Hamlin at all this offseason? Have you kept up with him?
A little bit. I've tried to check in here and there, and obviously he's a guy that a lot of people want to talk to, and he's got an amazing story to tell, and so obviously, I try to respect his personal space, but try to check in when I can as well, and so haven't had the chance really to sit down and chat extensively, but just checking in here and there.
You mentioned kind of the weight room competition with your guys at Pitt. I know Kalijah Cansey, big guy, drafted in the first round by Tampa Bay. People have compared him to Aaron Donald, who's obviously a Pitt guy like you. I mean, I guess how much of, maybe this is a stretch, but how much of Aaron Donald do you see in him, and what are the Buccaneers getting out of a guy like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to make an exact comparison because I never was at Pitt with Aaron Donald. But, in terms of his tape and his body type and the way he plays, from my perspective, they seem like very, very similar players. And, everything I know about Kalijah, he's got a high motor. He just plays hard, and, he's a real student of the game. And, in addition to all that, it's just a freak athletically. His get-off is unbelievable. So, he's going to be a great player, and I wish he was here in Cincy, but I'm excited for him down in Tampa Bay.
So you play almost an entire full season last year after Clark goes down. You perform well. You even get your first game ball in the playoffs in the snow. You make it to the AFC Championship game as a rookie, which is remarkable for most people. When you kind of look back at the 2022 season, what do you think about most, and how do you want to build on that going into 2023?
Yeah, I mean, that whole 2022 season was just a blessing from start to finish, and just learned a ton of lessons. And, I'm just grateful for all the things I've learned, and, grateful for the opportunity to finish what we started last year, this year. And, the goal is to win a Super Bowl, and, that's what's on everyone's mind. And we didn't do that last year, but, I know everyone in here has stronger resolve than ever to make that happen this year. So, that's really the main thing on everyone's mind at this point in time, and we're gonna do our best to make it happen.
I guess kind of my last question is touching on that. You, Evan, Drew, and then obviously you guys just drafted Brad Robbins. I guess kind of what is the collective mindset of the special teams unit specifically going into the offseason, OTAs, and training camp?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say from my perspective there's a particular change in perspective. Coach Simmons, he's going to coach us hard, all four of us, and we're all going to have to compete. And that's just the nature of the biz. Yeah. But we're all going to buy in wholeheartedly, and we're going to get better and just compete healthily every day and be ready when the time comes. And I'm just excited to just get going with it.
All right, that's Bengals long snapper Cal Adomitis. Cal, never enough time with you. Always a great conversation to have, a breath of fresh air. Appreciate you, my friend, and we will be chatting with you soon.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, don't go away. We'll be right back on the Strictly Stripes podcast.
Hey guys, if you love college football, we think you'll like the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and my co-host Shahan Jeharaja and I, each week we talk about the best programs, best coaches, best players in the sport. It's all football, no off-field stuff, no legislation. It's about the teams that are going to matter most in the playoff race. Will Georgia three-peat? Always on the lookout for angry Bama. The Big Ten, Ohio State and Michigan battling at the top, and Penn State on the rise. The Pac-12 matters again, not just USC, but Oregon and Washington as well. The playoff is expanding. Expand your podcast listening. Try the College Football Survivor Show wherever you find podcasts.
And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So great to hear from Cal Adomitis. Always a breath of fresh air talking with him, especially in the Bengals locker room. A very fun guy. And before we get into kind of the rest of our offseason workout conversation, we want to remind you guys to sign up for our Strictly Stripes newsletter. Very easy. Just like signing up for Cincinnati Football Insider. It only takes a few minutes. Go to cleveland.com/newsletters. Make sure you select the Strictly Stripes newsletter option. Obviously, it's free. It's in your inbox every morning, and you get the best reporting, insights, and analysis from me, Mike, and Andrew. So go to cleveland.com/newsletters. So we talked a lot about, obviously, the Joe Burrow contract situation, the whole lay of the land when it comes to that. But I want to kind of focus a little bit more on T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. We talked about a little bit, obviously, earlier in the podcast. I was kind of thinking about this. So Jamar makes it for phase 2 of workouts, which, that started on Monday. We're recording this on a Tuesday night. He wasn't there for phase 1, which is really mostly just lifting and cardio and endurance training. That makes sense because he was already doing that with his trainer in Austin, Texas, where I think Irv Smith has the same trainer, but he was doing his own thing. He kind of joined the crew this week. T. Higgins has already kind of been around since phase 1. But that's interesting because you would think a lot of those guys, like being as good as they are, being due for like extensions, whenever that is. Obviously for Jamar, it's down the road, but still, he doesn't really have to come if he doesn't want to. It's voluntary. Like, is there something to be said that like these guys are in a situation where, hey, you don't have to be here, but you're here, you're catching passes, you're lifting, you're doing your endurance. Like, I mean, is there really anything to look at? Because I think there is something to be said about that, but what do you guys think?
I think the overall attendance is impressive. I think that's sort of what it speaks to. It's not just one or two guys. This is the stars are there, and it's like up and down the roster. I mean, it's only a couple players that weren't there today. Jonah Williams and Taylor Boyd, I think, were the two starters. Lael Collins wasn't there, but he's rehabbing. So I think so. I think those things speak well of sort of the organization and the buy-in and how they've kind of structured things to get the group together, and I do think that says something about the tight-knit locker room.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, like with Lael, he's rehabbing. Chidobe Awuzie is rehabbing. I know Sidney Jones, I believe, wasn't there either. I don't think he has any injury issues, but I mean, he's a reserve, so you don't have to read too much into that. But those guys, Tyler Boyd, and then, of course, Jonah Williams because of his contract situation, although it appears that just based on reports out there that he might be back in time for the mandatory portion, which is not until OTAs on June 6th, and then the mandatory minicamp the week after that. But we'll kind of see how that plays out, obviously. That's just based on reports. But no, I think it's just, it shows, and this is cliche, but there's truth to this. Like, this team knows how close they were to winning a Super Bowl. And they know, like, yeah, they don't have to be there. Like, Jamar didn't even have to come this week. T didn't even have to come for phase 1 or let alone phase 2. But they know, like, working with Joe Burrow, getting that chemistry back, like, Joe Burrow trying out different things, like whether it's in phase 2 or whether it's in OTAs, whether it's different throws, trying different routes out. Like, you do that now, before you shut down for training camp, you're already clicking on all four cylinders at training camp, and you're going to click either way in training camp. But I think there's something to be said about you just get a little bit of extra spice and a little bit of an extra juice out of something like that. And so you don't have to read too much into it because, of course, like, it's voluntary. But when you look at like the overall attendance, like Mike said, and you look at where this team was and where they can be next year, which is possibly being in the Super Bowl, if not winning it, I absolutely think that's critical. I mean, do you agree with that, Andrew? Do you think, it says a lot about the fact that this team really means it when they say they want to win a Super Bowl?
Yes, I do think they want to win a Super Bowl.
But just being there though, like, does that really speak to that, or is it just being cliche at this point?
Yeah, that's too cliche for me. With these voluntary workouts, I never try to read too much into them. The guys have stuff going on. Sometimes it's hard for guys to get here for, however many days they're going to be here. I don't know. I just think that, I'm not, kind of sold on the idea that, a guy showing up for minicamp or a lot of guys showing up for minicamp or OTAs or voluntary workouts or whatever. I don't know if, having as great of attendance as you can. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but I just don't think it necessarily means anything. Just like I don't think, guys skipping means anything either. I've never really kind of bought into that.
I mean, I think overall that makes sense, but I think when it comes to guys like T. Higgins, I slightly disagree. And actually, not even just T. Higgins. Like, think about Logan Wilson. Had a shoulder injury, which almost ended his run to the Super Bowl, has surgery right after that, comes back, sort of re-aggravates it last year, misses one game, I think, against the Falcons because of it. He didn't have to be there today. I mean, he really didn't, or really just in general, like these last couple of weeks, because, you really, really want to heal that shoulder. Like, you're going into a contract year. You don't want to risk hurting something now before you can even try to make a case for getting extended if, that doesn't get done, let alone before the season. But he's there. I mean, he did mention this, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. Like he said, the biggest thing for him is keeping that shoulder healthy. But at the same time, he doesn't want that to hold him back from, staying juiced up and staying in good shape and being ready for training camp. So it's a balance, obviously, because he has to be careful. But that's the thing is, like, you don't want to lean towards just the side of caution of, I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to hurt my chances of getting extended. Same with T. Higgins. Like, what if you're practicing and God forbid you get hurt? Whatever you hurt, at least, I mean, you don't want that to happen, but even though you accept that risk of that happening, that still shows you're not just invested in yourself and, what you're going to get out of it, whether it's an extension or whatever, you're invested in the team. And so you could talk about culture, camaraderie. I know Joe Burrow kind of alluded to that a lot, but I do think there's something to be said, even if you don't want to read too much into it. Like Andrew said, I think with specific examples like that, there's a case to be made that, like, yeah, there's something to look at when it comes to those guys showing up. Kind of a fun question I wanted to sort of pick your all's brains on, and this is a way too early prediction, obviously, but one interesting goal Jamar Chase said that he has for next year is he wants to break the Bengals single-season record for receptions, which is 112, set by TJ Houshmandzadeh, I think 16 years ago. I mean, he only needs, I don't want to say only because this is a lot, but he needs at least like 4 games with 6 catches, and then like 11 or 12 games with 7, or half and half with 6, half with 7. Like, I mean, do you think he can actually break that record next year, or is that just being extremely ambitious?
Well, I think it's ambitious just because, I mean, you kind of look at the roster and, I mean, look what the team did at running back. And I guess if you could say kind of more accurately, what they didn't do at running back, this is a team that's going to throw the ball. You've got, T. Higgins on board, obviously. You've got Tyler Boyd. You just drafted Charlie Jones. Irv Smith kind of sounds like he's going to be a part in that passing attack as well. And I understand it was a different league. I think it was 2007 when Houshmandzadeh did that, or 2008, one of those years.
He wasn't even the number one receiver. It was Chad Ochocinco.
Right. Well, but that's my point. It's like, they had Chad Johnson and Houshmandzadeh and Well, I don't know.
Trying to think. I think I forget who that
was on that
receiver was.
team.
Chris Henry. Chris Henry was still there.
Like, there was not really like a number 3 receiver like they had in Tyler Boyd, or even what they hope Charlie Jones is a number 4. So I just think that there's a lot working against that. You've got to stay healthy. Not only have you got to stay healthy, you've got to. This team has got to air the ball out, because you look at kind of the numbers. T. Higgins has been remarkably consistent. He's not going anywhere. Tyler Boyd's going to get his, and if everybody stays healthy, I don't think it's going to happen.
I think it's possible. I think he needs to stay healthy and play in every game, and he can't.
Yeah, that's true.
And he can't, if they are clinched something, they can't sit him in the last game, because he needs to average like a decent amount of catches, every game. You guys were insulting Kenny Watson, who had 52 catches in 2007 when TJ Houshmandzadeh set the record. Which
I do remember that guy.
He was a running back. Their third receiver only had 21, but they spread it out to 4 or 5 guys. So, but no, I think it's possible. It's just that, especially if they don't replace the production that Samaje had in the passing game and Hayden, if some more of that goes to the receivers, I don't think there's any reason he can't have a big season like that.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, Kenny Watson, if you are listening to this podcast, whenever and wherever you are, forgive me. Yeah, because he was playing with Rudy Johnson. He was the lead running back that year. That was right before the Cedric Benson era. But see, that he still played for your Bears at that time. Cedric Benson did, Mike. But yeah, no, that's like I said. I did the math. Like, he has to have at least 6.6 catches per game, which, like I said, you need at least 6 to 7 catches per game. More games with 7, or again, the math depends, but it has to be 6 or 7. And you have to play that 17th game. The advantage too is they played 16 games back then. You're playing 17 now, unless, like you said, you clinch something and you bench him. But if you're going for a number 1 seed and you're playing the Chiefs in Week 17, I think that Week 18 game against Cleveland, depending on how they do as well, might have some implications. So I don't think that's going to be a rested game, unless they go 14-2 for all we know, and that game is a crap bowl at that point. That's the fun part to speculate later on. But I do want to sort of wrap up with something really funny that we kind of heard. We kind of heard Jamar and Joe talk about. I think someone, I forget who, asked Joe Burrow, like, it was said that he likes to pull UFC moves on like Jamar Chase for fun. And he said, yeah, we kind of have fun a little bit. And then Jamar Chase was like, oh yeah, he'll do the fly kicks. I don't watch a lot of UFC, but he described different moves that Joe Burrow would do, just like sneaking up on people. If you were to put Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase in a UFC ring right now, I know Joe is 6'4", Jamar is 6 foot, so Joe's probably a little bit heavier and bigger. Even then though, who has the better fly kick? If you just had to guess, who would win a UFC match at that point?
Jamar Chase, 100%.
You think so?
Yeah, 100%. Jamar's more
faster,
athletic.
twitchier.
I think athleticism every time.
Faster and twitchier is what you're saying?
Yeah. Right.
Do you agree, Mike? You're just going to give it to Jamar there?
Whoa, sure. Sounds good.
No, you got to have some conviction. I want to say, oh, yeah, sure, I think he can definitely do it. I want to hear some conviction. You really think Jamar can do it?
I've got no horse in this race, so no conviction.
Great Tuesday night. A lot of fun, a lot of chatter, a lot of banter. Stay with us. Wednesday, we have an interesting discussion about some competition. Not necessarily now, because it's voluntary workouts, but sort of down the road once we get into mandatory mini camps and OTAs, some interesting competitions and names to look at that we haven't really talked about much on this podcast, and some more interesting guest interviews like the one we had with Cal Adomitis. But once again, for myself, Andrew and Mike, I'm Mohammed Ahmad. Have a good Tuesday.